If you're looking for a free course in Italian wine, you've come to the right place. Tony Margiotta here. This is part 5 of a multi-series of Italian wine videos, all covering a different topic so you can master Italian wine in small, easy chunks. In this video, we're going to cover the concept of subregions, what they are, and why you should pay attention to them. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and the bell button below so you don't miss out on the other Italian wine videos of this course and much, much more. Whether your goal is getting a wine certification or you just might want to enrich yourself with Italian wine knowledge, you've come to the right place. So here's our pentagon of wine graph, and as you know, this is the best way of organizing massive amounts of information about Italian wine into 5 general buckets. And subregions, since it deals with territory, it fits within the location aspect to understanding Italian wine. Remember this? This is the regional map of Italy from a previous video. And as you know, there are 20 wine producing regions in Italy, as you can see here. But inside each of these regions, there are tinier subregions that create very specific wines that are unique. The subregions are directly linked to the classifications. That's because it's the classification regulations that devise the border lines for where certain wines can be made. Now follow me here. There are 2 types of subregions. One, I call it geographical areas. These tend to be larger winemaking areas with sort of looser regulations. And then you have appellations. These tend to be smaller areas of land. Appellations tend to have more rules and restrictions as to where the vineyards can be located, which types of grapes can be grown, how to grow them, how to make the wine in that area, and what percentage of various grape varietals can be present in those wines. When people in the wine world talk about terroir, or sense of place, that the idea that you can taste the place in the bottle, these types of terroir-driven wines are dependent on the appellation, which allows the groundwork to make all that possible. But remember, there's exceptions to every rule, and I will show you 1 or 2 in this video. Now take a look at this graph. As a general rule, geographical subregions have an IGT or an IGP classification, and appellations usually have the DOC, DOP, or DOCG classifications. At the end of the day, the subregion is a way of saying this unique wine comes from a very specific area inside of a region. It's so unique that it has its own territory inside that region that differentiates itself from other wines in the same exact region. That's why location is crucial in understanding Italian wine. The wines can dramatically change just by traveling from one vineyard to the other that's 1 kilometer away, like a 10-minute walk. Because of this amazing biodiversity of Italian wine, we need to have these subregions to geographically differentiate one wine to the next. Let's look at some wine maps to make this concept a little clearer. This is a DOCG map of Tuscany, okay? So as you can see, there are smaller pieces of land where certain types of wines are made. For example, if you follow my cursor here, there's Vernaccia di San Gimignano, DOCG, which is a white wine. That's only allowed to be made in this tiny little yellow area. Anything outside of that, and it cannot be called that wine, and it certainly cannot get the classification. So that's a great example of an appellation. Okay, let's look at something else a little bit larger. For example, Chianti, probably one of the most famous wines in the world. The Chianti DOCG, if you can follow the arrows here, this whole orange section here and all of this orange section around here, it's a very large appellation, but nonetheless, it's an appellation. It's a DOCG, and it even has an area over here where it's allowed to make wine. Okay, let's compare that with now the DOC map of Tuscany. Okay, So you noticed how there's only a few DOCGs in Tuscany, but when you look at the DOC appellations, there are dozens of them. And this is, quite frankly, very complicated to look at. But as you can follow the arrows and look at some of these, these are smaller pieces of territory inside the large region of Tuscany itself. And they all have their own names, their own wine types, they have their own identity, they have their own character, their own aromas, textures, and flavors that differentiate themselves from one to the next. In fact, since Sangiovese is such a dominant red grape varietal in the region, Tuscany really made many wines with the Sangiovese grape and differentiated it by its sub-region, because a Sangiovese wine from one territory, like for example in the Chianti area, will taste very different from the Montalcino territory, for example, for the DOC, the Rosso di Montalcino DOC. Now, there's a third map in Tuscany, and this is the IGT map, okay? And as you can see here, in general, these are larger territories, larger geographical areas where certain types of wines are allowed to be made. Like now, for example, here, let me show you this one. This is actually a smaller geographical area here, this Val di Magra IGT, okay? That's a smaller one, but look at this blue area here, okay? This is Costa Toscana IGT. It's quite a large piece of territory where that geographical area where that wine is allowed to be made. But now, check this out. Look down here. There's a subregion called Toscana IGT, and you will see this in just about every wine shop you walk into, wherever you live in the world. But right below it, it says tutta la regione, which means the entire region. So basically, if you have a vineyard anywhere in Tuscany and you don't fit inside of any of these colored areas, like for example over here, you can just put the Toscana IGT label on your wine, and that kind of puts it a step up from table wine, okay, at least on the classification pyramid. Let's look at something a little bit more simple. This is Sicily, another one of Italy's 20 regions, and we're looking at the IGT map of Sicily. Very simple here, very simple map to understand. Sicily perhaps is a little bit more easier of a region to understand compared to Tuscany, for example. But as you can see here, there's some small areas that have their own IGT, which someday they might be able to get a DOC if enough great wines come out of that region and the government decides that with all the awards and all the credibility of the wines coming out of this area that they will achieve a DOC status someday, which is quite possible. But notice here, once again, we have an IGT called Terre Siciliane IGT, and it says tutta la regione, which means the whole region. So if you have a vineyard anywhere in Sicily, you can achieve the Terre Siciliane IGT sub-region, okay? Let's look at the DOC map of Sicily, okay? Gets a little bit busier, but still very clear. Not as much overlapping of territories like you'll see in Tuscany. And, Nero d'Avola is the dominant red varietal in Sicily, and you will find Nero d'Avola as the dominant grape in many of these appellations. And so they're named after the areas from which the wines come from to distinguish the Nero d'Avola wine from one place to the next. And I'm not going to show you the DOCG map of Sicily because there's only one, which is called Cerasuolo di Vittoria, which is down here in this area. Let's look at one more wine map. Let's see here. Oh, and by the way, if you're looking for, I know that this can be a little bit overwhelming to look at these wine maps, and I would say don't let them overwhelm you. Wine is a journey with no end in sight. That's the beauty of learning about wines and tasting new wines, and especially Italian wines. So if you'd like some appellation recommendations, go check out on Gladiator Wine TV, because I put together a playlist called Italian Wine Regions Crash Course, and I give you my favorite appellations and subregions for every single region, so you have a starting point for your journey into exploring the wines of each region. Let's take a look at another region. This is Abruzzo, and this is the IGT map. This is also a very, very simple map. You've got a few IGT subregions here, and they're quite large geographically for the most part. Now I want to compare this to the DOC map of Abruzzo. Take a look at this. Okay, look at this massive area that's in red. This is the DOC appellation of Montepulciano d'Abruzzo, one of Italy's most famous red wines. So it's almost the entire region. So I would go as far as to say is that the Montepulciano d'Abruzzo DOC is sort of a regional appellation and not just a geographical area. Okay, let's compare and contrast here. I just wanted to share that with you because it's somewhat of a rare occurrence that happens in Italy, where a DOC has such a large territory like the Montepulciano d'Abruzzo appellation. It almost seems like it should be a geographical area because of its size. You know, another example which I pointed out earlier was the Chianti DOCG, which is rather large in size for an appellation as well. But generally, the IGT subregions tend to be larger geographical areas with looser regulations on winemaking than the DOC. But as always in Italy, there's an exception to every rule. The point of this whole system is to identify and regulate specific types of wines so that quality standards are met and the taste profile fits within a certain range of style. You know, while it's a big price to study the complexity of Italian subregions, the payoff is an enriching journey of wine with no end in sight. So that's it for subregions. Until next time, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on the next videos about Italian wine and much, much more. Look out for part 6 of this Italian wine course, and I'll see you in the next video.